Dzień dobry. Słuchacie Państwo podcastu Polityki Insight z dystansu. W tej audycji rozmawiamy o najważniejszych wydarzeniach międzynarodowych, obserwujemy potyczki mocarstw i analizujemy politykę europejską. Poświęcamy uwagę sprawom bezpieczeństwa, obronności i przyglądamy się przemysłowi zbrojeniowemu. Nazywam się Marek Świerczyński i prowadzę dział bezpieczeństwa i spraw międzynarodowych Polityki Insight. Zapraszam na dzisiejszy odcinek. Jest piątek, 5 sierpnia. W Kielcach zakończył się 33. Międzynarodowy Salon Przemysłu Obronnego. Impreza zbrojeniowa osadzona w realiach regionu zmagającego się z zagrożeniem militarnym ze wschodu. Region ma tu znaczenie, bo MSPO to od dawna targi nie tylko krajowe, a przyciągające uwagę całej Europy. Moje rozmowy z liderami przemysłu zbrojeniowego przedstawię Państwu w przyszłym tygodniu. Dziś proponuję spotkania z 2 ministrami obrony krajów współtworzących bałtycką flankę NATO i Europy, Szwecji i Estonii. Pal Jonson i Hanno Pevkur byli najwyższymi rangą gośćmi targów i obu udało mi się zaprosić do podcastu Polityki Insight. Dlatego dziś z dystansu spojrzymy razem z nimi na bezpieczeństwo regionu i kontynentu, nasze wspólne zbrojenia i zbliżające się rosyjsko-białoruskie manewry Zapad. Minister obrony Szwecji, Pal Jonson, odbył w Kielcach rozmowy z Władysławem Kosiniakiem-Kamyszem i podpisał z nim list intencyjny dotyczący wspólnych działań na Bałtyku i współpracy w technologiach obronnych. Później Saab, a więc czołowa szwedzka firma zbrojeniowa, podpisała porozumienia z polską grupą zbrojeniową i grupą WB, by deklaracje ministrów przekuć w konkretne projekty. Polska i Szwecja zbliżają się do siebie, bo obie z niepokojem patrzą na wschód. I dlatego od niego zacząłem rozmowę z ministrem Jonsonem.
Pal Jonson, the Swedish defense minister, on MSPO, Poland's main defense exhibition. I would like to thank you, Minister, for this occasion, and I would like to start right away with looking into the nearest future, because in the coming days and weeks, we may again witness something that traditionally has been subject to a lot of concern, especially in our region, in the Baltic Sea, in the NATO eastern flank. That is, of course, the Zapad exercise, gathering the forces of Russia and Belarus. How do you perceive the situation today, and should we expect any dangers related to this year's edition of Zapad?
Well, thank you for having me on. Greatly appreciated. Now, in regards to Zapad, we're following it and monitoring very closely. It's one of our key purposes inside NATO is to have lots of experience in following Russia. We think that the exercise is limited in scope, predominantly centered around Belarus, and Russia's ground forces predominantly is bogged down in and around Ukraine, but we are on our toes and we're following the developments very closely.
Because, of course, it is not only about ground forces, it is also about the airspace, it is about the space itself, it is about GPS jamming, it is about hybrid activities, and predominantly it is about the sea domain, both on the surface and under the surface.
I think that's a very important point you're making there. Okay, the Russians are tied up in and around Ukraine with about 650 to 700,000 troops, but if you look at their naval capabilities, if you look at their air force capabilities, their nuclear capabilities and their cyber capabilities and their space capabilities, they're pretty much intact. That's why we are so laser focused also on the rearmament of Sweden and stepping up when it comes to defense investment, being of course heavily also inspired by what Poland is doing in this regard.
Do you expect them to attempt any provocations?
I'm not going to reveal our assessment in this. I can tell you that we are following the situation very closely and that we have good intelligence capabilities also to do that as well. And I know, of course, Poland is taking measures as well, and there will be an ongoing exercise, as far as I understand, also here in Poland.
Indeed. So I will reverse my question, or reverse the topic of the discussion. Are we prepared enough for the possible scenarios of Russia probing us as NATO?
I think that's one of the key issues here that is so important, that we are able to exercise deterrence and defense by conventional and nuclear methods, and that's also why Sweden has been so heavily engaged into NATO's DDA activities. Just after a year we became an ally. We sent a mechanized battalion to Latvia. I'm proud that we've been having 8 Gripen fighters patrolling the skies over for Poland.
In Malbork, yes, I've seen them. Thank you very much.
And we're also the framework country, as it's called, for FLF Finland, being in charge of coordinating NATO's activities for deterrence and defense in Finland. So we didn't join NATO just to get security guarantees. We also did it in order to provide them and to strengthen the whole northern flank.
There was a lot of discussions when Finland and Sweden were entering NATO, were finishing the entire process, which were actually a little bit diminishing the Russian threat because of the fact that the Baltic Sea rim seemed to be closing. There was a familiar phrase that Baltic was becoming a NATO sea. Do you see it like that today, having seen all those incidents that we've witnessed in recent months?
I'm not particularly comfortable using the expression NATO lake because it doesn't necessarily correspond to the realities. As I said, the Russian Baltic fleet is pretty much intact except for some of their Rupsha class, which are now in the Black Sea, but otherwise they are investing into their capabilities in this regard. So we are, of course, ramping up our naval capabilities. We're investing into submarines, surface competence. We, of course, warmly welcome that NATO is active in the Baltic Sea as well with Baltic Century, which we are heavily engaged into. And the Baltic Sea, of course, is more important for Russia now than it's been in decades because they can't operate on the Black Sea in the way they used to. So the number of Russian vessels and how they act is stepping up. And that's something we're cognizant about, and that's also measures that we're taking to counter those activities.
You've mentioned initiatives and investments by many countries, of course, Poland among others. Do you see a Baltic capability coalition forming before our eyes?
I think there is a strong unity of purpose among all the Nordic, Baltic, Polish friends, and that is one, we're very similar in our reading on Russia and the Russian threat, and we take it very serious. We're similar in our commitment also to support Ukraine, and it's the region within the alliance that is by far is stepping up its defense investments most significantly as well. So there is strong unity of purpose among us, and we're right now shaping our defense posture to be able to better exercise deterrence and defense and keep every inch of the alliance safe.
But of course, arguably, this is also the region, and the borders within the region, the borders with Russia, can be perceived as one of the most vulnerable. Of course, the Suwalki Gap, the Suwalki Corridor is one of the hotspots. Then, of course, is the endless debate, how defendable are the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania? Do you see any changes that have happened in the recent years that make us feel with more confidence about NATO's and each individual country's capabilities to defend itself if Russia decides to attack?
First thing, right now, Russia is bogged down in and around Ukraine, but few things that we are cognizant of. We see that Russia is picking up important lessons from the war in Ukraine. We see it becoming better at long-range strike capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities, but also drones. And at the same time, they have a high ambitions to reconstitute their force. So even if they're down and getting bogged down now in Ukraine, and they haven't been successful in Ukraine. Just last year, they took 0.4% of Ukrainian territory, but at a loss of maybe 300,000 casualties. So they're not successful, but they have a propensity to take great political and military risk. What gives me encouragement is the fact that I left the Hague summit where all allies committed themselves to go up to 5% of GDP in defense investment. That's, of course, long overdue, but it's good that it's happening. So what we should be doing now is to make sure, just as Poland has proved to be, how you transform economic clout into combat power, and by being very quick and high on our material acquisition, and also make sure that we have the personnel to operate the new platforms and systems that we're getting.
So what is your response to that question? How make the numbers be our fighters? The numbers in terms of GDP, of course.
Well, in the correlation of forces, if it will only be the Nordics and only the Baltics, but we represent an alliance of 1 billion people and 32 countries, I very much appreciate that both the old administration and the Trump administration have been crystal clear. Article 5 is there, conventional nuclear deterrence is there, but Europe has to prepare itself to taking a larger part of the conventional deterrence inside the alliance, because the facing threat for the Americans is, of course, now in the Indo-Pacific. So I think we are transforming. What I am think is really crucial is this transition of having all these economic resources to make sure it generates combat power. Sometimes the challenge in Europe right now is that we have a defense industrial base shaped for peacetime situations. So the lead times to get the new material is a little bit too long, and that's a cause of concern. But I know Poland is now drafting a new defense industrial strategy. We just presented ours a few months ago, and it's about increased innovation, increased production, and increased cooperation.
If you were to indicate 3 or 4, or as many as you wish, capability gaps, relevant most in our region, in the Baltic Sea rim, which would have been?
I think all across Europe there is a lack of available ground forces. That I think the reductions has been the most sizable on the ground forces. I applaud every minister who buys ammunition, who buys supplies, spare parts, logistics and enablement, because that's the weakness we have in Europe now, is ground forces that's available to fight tonight, but also can stand for a long fight. So investment into that, investment into air defense, and of course the Secretary General has alluded to maybe we have to increase by 400%. I think that's very wise given the long-range capabilities and long-range strike capabilities that the Russians are developing as well. So filling up our magazine to have magazine depth as well, so that I think, and also working more with the US and counter-US system and unmanned systems. Then if you look at some of the strategic enablers, I think that where the Americans are hard or almost impossible to replace overnight is of course strategic mobility, its ISR capabilities and some space-based assets.
There is a debate on the industrial side of this European reinforcement, and not only European but also in the United States, that the legacy platforms, legacy systems are too costly, they take too long to produce, they are too heavy in many aspects, and that there is need, also demonstrated by the example of the Ukrainian anti-drone systems, for instance, for more agility. How to achieve it?
Spending 4 days in Ukraine, I just came home last week after being in Odessa and Kiev. And the things we have learned from the Ukrainians and things that we should be inspired by them. I think one is how they were able to transform their defense industrial base. Of course, they went from 100 companies to 800 companies. They completely privatized it. They opened it up for competition. So what you're seeing in Ukraine is that the prices for products are actually lowered, even though they're allowed to take out more profit. So it's obviously an effective market that delivers on price and on time. And I think we should be inspired on that as well. Then there are, of course, the drone factors and the counter-drone factors. I mean, the innovation cycles in and around Ukraine, what takes 5 or 6 years takes 5 or 6 months in Ukraine. The agility and cutting red tape, the Ukrainians told me they dropped 35 laws and regulations in order to make sure that they have an efficient public-private cooperation. I think those are some of the things that are important. I don't foresee it's only being drones in the future. Drones will be extremely important, and we should be doing more on drones and counter-drone systems. But if you want to take territory, you need infantry and you also need tanks. So I think until right now on the contact line, there is no room for maneuver warfare. But then you're going to have another innovation breakthrough as well. So in the end, you can't control territory by drones, but you do it actually by land warfare.
Let us finish this conversation on a bilateral note and speaking about Polish-Swedish relations, because it is growing in importance, I would say, in the past few years.
Sweden and Poland has never been as close in modern times as we are these days. And what really transformed our bilateral relationship was, of course, Sweden joining NATO, because we're no longer partners as we're true allies. And what followed from that during the last 18 months has been very, very inspiring for us and for me personally, being able to go as often, having our Gripens at Malbork Air Force Base, by doing what we did today in signing a letter of intent on deepening not just our defense cooperation, which is great and getting deeper by every day, but also cooperating more when it comes to defense in industrial base, which I think is commendable as well, doing more on innovation and security of supplies. And hopefully we can go even further in that collaboration.
One of the subjects of this cooperation, actually, which is debated for really decades, is the submarine purchase, or maybe, some kind of deeper cooperation around that. How do you see the status of it from your point of view today as we speak at MSBO?
We are both navies which has a Baltic focus on it, and now we're allies. It opens up great avenues for deepening our collaborations between our two navies, and I know the chief of the Swedish Navy is in very close contact with his Polish counterpart. I think it's great. If we could make progress on developing common platforms in the future, I think there will be great merits for what we can do on logistics, sustainment, education, training, sharing intelligence, and those kinds of matters, if we have the same kind of platforms and the same force posture. So what we're looking for in the underwater domain for us is not clients, but it's strategic partners to develop our underwater capabilities even further. And I do claim we have the best submarines to operate in the Baltic Sea, because it's such a special environment with an average depth of 55 meters and this kind of bridge water, as it's called. So in that sense, I think we have unique capabilities, but Poland has to decide for itself what serves its national purpose best in regard to the Orca program, of course.
Pal Jonson, Swedish Defense Minister, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Jeszcze bliżej wschodniego zagrożenia niż Szwecja jest Estonia, najmniejszy kraj NATO nad Bałtykiem i potencjalnie najbardziej narażony w przypadku rosyjskiej agresji. Ale od lat Estonia prezentuje też najbardziej stanowcze podejście do bezpieczeństwa i obrony, inwestując rekordowe ponad 5% PKB w wojsko i demonstrując niezłomność na arenie międzynarodowej. Dokładnie z takim przesłaniem przyjechał do Kielc Hanno Pevkur, którego również musiałem zapytać na początku o Zapad, mimo że wydawał się tym pytaniem nieco znudzony.
My guest in Politica Insight podcast is Hanno Pevkur, Estonian Defense Minister. Thank you, sir, for talking to us. I would like to start with what we might see in the coming days and weeks. What usually, traditionally was subject to some kind of concern. That is the Zapad exercise by Russia and Belarus happening, right at our borders in the sense of the region in Baltic states and Poland. How do you see any potential threat of provocations?
Well, first of all, I really do believe that the less we are talking about the Zapad exercise, the better it is. So it's not very big this year. To be honest, Estonian ally, the joint exercise, the Hedgehog in Estonia, was bigger.
The same is the case in Poland, because we will have Iron Defender exercise pretty big.
Yeah, so we had 18,000 troops just on the border of Russia. And I do not recall that the Russian media was talking a lot about that there is a NATO exercise right on their backyard. So, of course, we are doing our job. We are monitoring that very closely. And, of course, we do whatever is necessary to prevent any kind of provocations. But to be honest, as I said, we should keep our heads calm and cold and focusing on that, what we are doing to help Ukraine, because the more Ukraine can damage Russian defense forces, or military, it's not defense forces, they are like offense forces, the better it is. And we also understand and see that Zapad exercise is mostly this year focused on the Belarusian forces, and the Russians are still focused to Ukraine. So this is why let's stay calm, be pragmatic, do our job, gather intelligence, and all the necessary precautions and steps are in process.
In discussing Zapad, we often tend to look across the land border to the east. However, of course, war is going on in all domains. Something might happen in the Baltics. Actually, a lot of things are happening in the Baltic Sea. Something might happen in the air or in space, like the GPS jamming, or in this cognitive domain, completely under the radar of military. In your view, what should be the societal preparedness response to these kinds of threats or provocations?
Well, first of all, I believe that we have to admit to all ourselves that the security environment has changed. And this will be like this for the years to come. It will not be business as usual. We have to understand that we will all invest into defense the amounts we spent during the Cold War in the West. So over 3.5% So Estonia will go over 5% with the core defense spendings already next year. We have today 3.3, 3.4, something like that, like Poland. And this is the point what the societies have to understand. We are not living in the peace environment, because one key player on our continent is not respecting the international law. When Russia would respect the international law, then we would not have to talk about higher defense spendings. We would not have to talk about investing so heavily to our defense industry. And this is the reality. So all these changes, what we see at the moment in the societies, the cause of that comes from Kremlin. The cause of that comes from the decisions of President Putin. He was the one who started the full-scale war against Ukraine. He was the one who was part of the Chechenian war. He was the one who started the war against Georgia in 2008. He was the one who decided to invade Crimea. So only in the last 25 years, we've seen 4 wars the Russian administration started. So the reality is that our societies have to be more collective. Our societies have to be more united in the West, not to fight about small technicalities or, small details, but to understand that the higher cause is the freedom, and the higher cause are the freedoms of every person living here in Europe, traveling without the visa, not having the border patrols, enjoying the joint currency, of course not in Poland, but who knows, maybe one day also in Poland. But these are the values, these are the benefits we are all enjoying, and we do not want to lose them. So to preserve that, we need to spend more on defense and deter Russia.
Some people call it the European way of life. Yes,
True.
the value that we are protecting. Defense and defending ourselves and rearming Europe will need to become part of this European way of life. The European Union, which we are both member states, has launched a very robust vision for supporting defense spendings. What are your plans, Estonian plans, how to use it? What would be your advice how to combine it with NATO capability planning and implementing?
First of all, still the military planning will stay in the rooms of NATO. Of course, we are all members of NATO, and we have to take care that we keep that solidarity inside of NATO. Secondly, what I see as a European Union role, and also the new mechanism like the SAFE or the increased budget for the defense in next period, is the added value to the countries, and more specifically to the countries which are keeping the front door closed. Because when we keep the front door closed in the Baltic states and in Poland, then people in Paris, in London, in Berlin, in Madrid can live safely. And this is the point. This means the solidarity. When there was a migration crisis, we all, including Poland and Estonia, we helped Italy and Greece. And at the moment we see that our threat is coming only from one direction. This is east. So I truly believe that the role of the European Union, yes, can be increased also when we look at the defense. But we need to understand that the military planning is the responsibility of NATO and member states. What we are doing. First, as I said, we will increase our defense budget over 5% already next year to core defense. That means that we will acquire a lot of new capabilities in all domains. Maybe not in space, but every other domain. We are investing heavily. That means that we are more agile, we have more lethal power, and we are more prepared. So I can start counting all the howitzers, all the infantry fighting vehicles, all the sea mines or anti-vessel missiles, or the long-range fires, HIMARS, loitering munition, etc., all these numbers. But the point is that we are doing all these investments according to the NATO capability targets. And every country should do the same. We have agreed jointly what are the capabilities we need to have in each country to have the joint regional plans and executability of these plans. So when every country will execute the regional plan and will fulfill the capability targets, then we can be quite sure that NATO and Europe is well protected. And to be honest, we need to have more self-confidence. Russian economy is less than Italy's economy. Russian economy is less than Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg economy in total. We have 500 million people in Europe. So when we add also United States and Canada, then we go
beyond 1 billion,
yes.
Perhaps, yes.
And the economies we have, the military power we have, yes, it needs to be increased. But let's do not overestimate the Russian capabilities.
But this is what we have been discussing since the war started. I mean, how to make those figures, those numbers, become fighters for our cause. What is your advice? What is your response?
You have, on one hand, 5 fingers. When you start to poke with one finger, it hurts, but it's not lethal. When you put these 5 fingers together into fist and punch, then it can be lethal. And this is exactly what we need to do. All these different fingers, like countries, have their capabilities and are strong. But when we join the hands, when we join the forces, then NATO has been, is, and will be the strongest military alliance in the world.
Speaking about capabilities and technologies, Estonia being a small country, it is probably best known for military robotics, yes? The worldwide known company originated now in foreign hands, but originated from Estonia. How do you see the priorities for your defense industry, sitting here at defense exhibition?
Well, we have very clear understanding of what we want to achieve. First, we have grown very rapidly. The defense industry and also the Defense Industry Association has basically tripled its size. So when we take the volumes or the turnovers, then we've reached last year 500 million. In few years, probably we will reach 2 billion. So this is first. Secondly, I would say that it is important to understand that we will not be able to have a huge heavy industry. When we talk about tank production or howitzer production, we will focus on smart things: robotics, AI, drones, battlefield management, autonomous systems. So these are our strengths, and we are focusing on that. How to make this solid, heavy steel to smart capability. And this is what our companies are providing. So when you take each of them here, you can see that how have they approached the target to make something smart. And also even the new solutions, when we have the shipbuilder here, then you can see that they are in the lead of the European project to have the new type of semi-autonomous military vessel. Estonia is leading that project in Europe. So this is what we do. We make things smarter.
Do you see any avenues for bilateral cooperation with Polish industries? What kind of talks did you have here at Kielce?
We have that already today, and this is increasing constantly. First, Estonia buys quite a lot from Polish industry already today. Secondly, I know that Estonian companies are selling to Polish army, which is good. And also business-to-business relations are growing. So we have one company, Weiren, who is interested in cooperation with WB Electronics. We have BGZ approached some of our companies approached them. So it is in our interest to have this cooperation because we are in one region and we are the first front line if we need to defend NATO. So it is absolutely necessary that our companies are working together. It is absolutely necessary that we plan acquisitions together among the governments, what we are doing. For instance, the Piorun acquisition is done together with the 3 Baltic states and Poland. So this is what we need to do, and this is what we can do more.
Hanno Pevkur, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Na dziś to wszystko. Na kolejny odcinek zapraszam za tydzień. Posłuchajcie również naszych innych audycji. We wtorki Energii do Zmiany, w środy Na Słuchu, a w czwartki Wartości Dodanej, podcastu o gospodarce, rynkach i technologii. Do usłyszenia.